Hi, I'm Abby, and I am slowly telling my 9/11 widow story. This week, I'm going to be telling the story of the Armory, which was set up that first week after 9/11 happened in the first family center that was set up in the Armory in New York. And I was advised by Arron's workplace that I should go and file a missing persons report, which was the first step, I guess, in kind of declaring Arron as a potential victim. And there was a big group of us. It was myself and Arron's mom, Selena. It was Brent, his friend in a wheelchair. It was Bruce, who some of you might know from the Chateau Chronicles, and my brother, Matt. We all kind of traipsed down and we decided to make a kind of a pilgrimage, I guess, to his office, which was in Midtown, just to meet the people there because I had not met anybody because Arron had just taken this job 2 months prior. The other reason I wanted to go to his office was because I knew that in his desk somewhere there would be a toothbrush which would contain his DNA. And unfortunately, I knew we were going to need a sample of his DNA to give to the police for the missing person report. So when Arron was 19, he'd had a bicycle accident and he had essentially fallen face first into the pavement. And so he was missing all of his top teeth and he wore a plate. So as a result of this, he used to take his plate out all the time to brush his teeth. So I knew he always had a toothbrush wherever he was, and I knew he kept one at his desk. That was kind of my ulterior motive. So after we went there, we made our way to the Armory. And it was kind of complicated and a little chaotic because we had Brent in the wheelchair. So as it turned out, the Armory was not at all wheelchair accessible. And so he and my brother and Bruce went off to try and find a service elevator at the back of the building. It was so crazy. So we walk into this huge cavernous building and there's just hundreds of people there. And it's almost bizarre because every table has a vase with either a red or a white rose in it. In one corner, there appears to be sort of clergy of all flavors. There's sort of people in robes and obviously a rabbi, and it's sort of like, all right, that's like religion corner over there. And then there was another corner where they seemed to be doing office-y type things. And then in the center were just tables and tables and tables of police officers with people sitting at the table opposite them, most in tears of some, or just looking super grim. We waited in line. It had to walk past the wall of people's faces, mostly men, and you'd catch a glimpse of dragon tattoo on left bicep or wearing a blue suit with a red tie, whatever it was. Father of four, just heartbreaking. So we waited in line and finally got to sit with an officer, and Arron's mom sat with a different officer than I sat with. I guess I don't know why we did that. As I mentioned in the first episode of these 9/11 Chronicles was that I kind of knew exactly what Arron was wearing. But I do remember at one point saying he was wearing gray flannels, and the officer just looked at me blankly, like he had no idea what I was talking about. And I was like, gray pants? And then he wrote it down. And I just remember thinking, was that a Canadian term or a British term? Where did I get gray flannels? And why didn't this guy know what gray flannels were? I thought it was such an odd thing to not know about. But there you go. Not everybody knows about fashion, I guess. I don't know. I remember it's funny the things you remember. I just remember the gray flannels. And he's filling out this booklet, basically. It's 8 pages of questions. And there's no computer set up yet. They don't have a system. So everything's being written by hand. And it was just excruciating. And I remember thinking, there was just no way that they were going to find people with this system in place. And I was already, because of the gray flannel incident, I was already feeling like this guy was inept. He wasn't going to be taking a good report on Arron and what was missing. So Yeah, it was really strange. Anyway, after we did that, we kind of got shuffled over to this area that I'd seen before and sat down, and it was the Red Cross, as it turned out. And this woman just kept asking me, like, what's your mortgage, dear? Like, my mortgage? What? You know, what about, do you have any car loans? Like, she's asking me all these questions that just seem like so out of left field that I don't know how to answer them. And I don't know why she's asking me them. And then I look up at a sign above her, and I realize it's not just Red Cross, but there's a sign above her that say victims of crime. And I remember just thinking, victim of crime? Because I was still in the headspace that this was kind of like a natural disaster, you know, like it was an earthquake. It hadn't really fully registered to me yet that Arron was a victim of crime, like that he had been murdered. And I remember the first time somebody said the word murder in association to his death. And I was just so taken aback, just like, murdered? Like, really? Like, I guess he was murdered, you know? And then just also looking at that, and now I'm sitting, I literally have a check in my hand for the amount that I kind of pulled out of a hat in terms of what I thought my mortgage might be. And I just couldn't believe it. And I looked at that sign again. I went, oh my God, he's not the only victim here. I'm a victim too. And that was really, really hard to kind of swallow in that moment. So the other thing that happened in that first week is that we were in touch with the Canadian consulate. And through the Canadian consulate, we were able to speak with the coroner that was representing Canada. So he was representing all of the Canadian victims. And although Arron was technically British, he had grown up in Canada, which is where we met. In fact, somebody asked me how we met, and we met at a party when I was like 20 years old. He was 24 in Toronto. We met in Toronto. So we had this conversation with this man who kind of turned out to be quite instrumental because, as I said, through this whole process, I'd been really pragmatic. So he was able to kind of walk me through what probably happened, that, you know, they'd all been moved into this corner office that was deemed fireproof, but that they were probably all overcome by smoke long before the building had fallen. It was also through him that I began to understand about sort of, you know, the DNA and the DNA requirements that we're going to need to have. And that's why I was able to hand Arron's toothbrush in to the police as part of his missing person report. The ending of this story is that we all piled back into the car after this episode. And I think we must have rented a limousine or something, because I remember we were all in this car and driving back along the highway, and over every overpass were people with flags, waving flags. And it was when it also started with the signs, "We will never forget." And I remember just being like, you know, like just so choked up as we went under every underpass, thinking, oh my God, like this thing is huge. You know, it was sort of the first time I kind of had a sense of the scale. Like it still hadn't sunk in because I was so ensconced in my own little world. And we got to our street, and as we're driving along the street, somebody had tied on every tree a red, white, and blue ribbon. And so we drove down, and all the trees were ribboned, and I knew it was for me. And that was huge and overwhelming as well. Okay, more next week.